The night I was left to freeze on my own doorstep in nothing but a silk nightgown, I never imagined it would lead to me becoming CEO of a billion-dollar empire. But before I tell you how I brought down the man who tried to destroy me, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Amara Chen, and this is the story of how I lost everything, only to gain so much more. It was a Tuesday evening in late January when everything started to unravel. I remember sitting in our kitchen in Boston, the one with the marble countertops and the expensive espresso machine that Victor had insisted we needed. The clock on the wall showed 11:30. I'd been sitting there for over 2 hours, watching my tea grow cold, waiting for my husband to come home. When I finally heard his car pull into the driveway, I didn't move. I just sat there, hands wrapped around that cold cup, listening to his footsteps approach the door. Victor walked in looking flushed from the bitter cold, his designer coat dusted with fresh snow. But it wasn't the snow I noticed. It was the perfume. Thick, floral, definitely not mine. The scent seemed to fill our entire kitchen within seconds. "You're still awake?" he asked, loosening his tie as he headed straight for the refrigerator. His tone was casual, almost cheerful, like he didn't notice the tension radiating from where I sat. "Long day at the office?" I asked quietly. "You know how it is, babe. Year-end closing. Everyone's scrambling to finalize contracts before the fiscal quarter ends." He pulled out leftovers from the night before and popped them in the microwave. "I'm exhausted. Barely had time to grab lunch." I watched him, this man I'd been married to for 8 years. This man I'd given up my career for. This man who now stood in our kitchen, reeking of another woman's perfume, and lied to my face without even blinking. "Where exactly were you tonight, Victor?" The words came out steadier than I felt. He turned to look at me, really look at me. For the first time since he'd walked in. "I just told you, the office." "Why?" "Because I checked our bank statements today. I pulled out the printed pages I'd been hiding under the placemat. And there are charges here for restaurants you claim you never visited. Hotel rooms on nights you supposedly slept at your desk. And for the past 6 months, your entire salary has been going into an account I don't have access to. You've just been transferring small amounts to our joint account like an allowance." The microwave beeped. Neither of us moved. Victor's expression shifted from surprise to something colder. He walked over to the table and sat down across from me, his eyes turning hard as ice. "You've been going through my financial records?" he asked. "They're our financial records," I corrected. "Or they used to be. I want to know what's going on." He laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "What's going on is that I work 70 hours a week to maintain this lifestyle. This house, your shopping trips, everything you've gotten comfortable with. And instead of being grateful, you sit here playing detective." "I haven't been shopping in months," I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "And I didn't ask for any of this. You're the one who insisted I quit my job. You said you wanted me home, that you didn't want me stressed from work. And now I'm regretting that decision," he snapped. "You've turned into exactly what I was afraid of. A bored, paranoid housewife with too much time on her hands." The words hit like a physical blow. I was a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates. I had a career, Victor. A good one. I gave it all up because you asked me to. "Then maybe you should take it back," he said, standing up abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the tile. "If you're so unhappy here, if you can't trust me, maybe you should just leave." "Leave?" I stood up too, my heart pounding. "This is my home, is it?" His voice was rising now. "Because from where I'm standing, all you do is make my life miserable. Constant questions, constant suspicion. You want to know the truth, Amara? Fine, you're right. I haven't been at the office every night. Sometimes I go places where I don't have to deal with your accusations and your sour face. I felt the room spinning. So you admit it, you're cheating on me. I admit that I'm tired, he shouted. Tired of coming home to this. Tired of you. Before I could process what was happening, he grabbed my arm. His fingers dug into my skin, hard enough to leave marks. I cried out, trying to pull away, but he was so much stronger. Victor, let go, you're hurting me. But he wasn't listening. He dragged me from the kitchen, through the hallway. I was barefoot, wearing only my thin silk nightgown. The cold tile burned against my feet as I struggled against his grip. What are you doing? Stop this! He yanked open the front door. A blast of freezing January air hit me like a wall. Snow was falling heavily, already piling up on our front steps. The temperature had to be below 0. You want out so badly, he growled. Here's the door, and then he shoved me, hard. I stumbled forward, my feet hitting the icy concrete of our porch. I fell to my knees on the snow-covered steps, the cold so intense it felt like fire against my skin. I heard the door slam behind me. The lock clicked. Then the deadbolt. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. The shock was too great. The thin fabric of my nightgown was already soaking through, turning to ice against my body. My feet, my hands, everything was going numb. I scrambled to my feet and pounded on the door. Victor, open this door right now. Victor! No answer. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could see the lights going off one by one. He was walking away. He was actually walking away and leaving me out here to freeze. Panic set in then, real primal terror. I knew I wouldn't last long in these conditions. Our neighborhood was one of those gated communities where everyone minded their own business behind high fences and security systems. Screaming for help would be useless. The wind would carry my voice away, and anyone who might hear would think it was just the storm. My phone was inside. My shoes were inside. Everything was inside. I looked down at my hands, already turning blue, and knew I had to do something. I had to get back inside that house. I ran to the living room window on shaking legs. The curtains were drawn. I banged on the glass with my fists, which were barely responding to my commands anymore. Victor, please, I'm freezing out here. Please. Nothing, just silence and the howling wind. I looked around desperately. My gaze landed on the garden statue near the flower bed. A heavy stone piece I'd bought last summer. It was half buried in snow now, but it was my only option. With hands that could barely feel anything anymore, I started digging it out. The snow burned my skin. Every second out here was agony. Finally, I managed to free the statue. It was heavy, so heavy, but adrenaline gave me strength. I lifted it above my head, aimed at the window, preparing to smash my way back into my own home. And that's when I heard it, a door opening. But not my door. The sound came from the mansion next door. I froze, the statue still raised above my head. I must have looked completely insane, standing there in a nightgown in a blizzard, about to break a window. The woman who emerged from the neighboring estate was someone I'd only seen a handful of times before. Estelle Montgomery. She was in her 70s, tall and regal, with perfectly styled silver hair that somehow looked elegant even at this hour. She wore a heavy fur coat that probably cost more than my car. Everyone in Boston knew who Estelle Montgomery was. She owned Montgomery Global Industries, one of the largest conglomerates in the Northeast. The mansion next to ours wasn't even her primary residence. It was just one of several properties she owned. I'd heard she rarely stayed there, which is why I was shocked to see her now. She looked at me without a trace of surprise on her face, as if she saw women freezing on doorsteps every night. Then she did something that changed everything. She walked down her steps, crossed the small distance between our properties, and without a word, took the heavy fur coat from her own shoulders and draped it over mine. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. The coat smelled expensive, like cedar and something subtly floral. I started shaking violently as the warmth hit my frozen skin. Estelle took my arm firmly, the way you might guide a child. "Come with me," she said. It wasn't a request. I let her lead me toward her mansion, too shocked and cold to resist. As we walked, she glanced back at my house with an expression of pure contempt. We entered her home, and the warmth hit me like a physical force. The foyer was enormous, all gleaming marble and crystal chandeliers. She guided me to a chair near a massive fireplace where logs crackled and popped. My husband, I'm sorry, I tried to explain, but my teeth were chattering so hard I could barely form words. Estelle held up one perfectly manicured hand. "Don't apologize, and don't explain. Not yet." She walked to a bar cart and poured amber liquid into a crystal glass. "Drink this. That's not a suggestion." I took the glass with trembling hands and sipped. Cognac. It burned going down, but spread warmth through my chest. Estelle stood by the fireplace, watching me with sharp, assessing eyes. Then she spoke the words that I would replay in my mind 1,000 times over the coming weeks. "I know exactly who you are, Amara Chen. And I know exactly who your husband is. Victor Reyes, Executive Director of Logistics at Montgomery Global Industries." She paused, letting that sink in. "My company, I own it, every division, every employee, including him." I stared at her, the cognac glass frozen halfway to my lips. More importantly, Estelle continued, her voice taking on an edge of steel. "My nephew Marcus runs the entire operation as CEO. He's Victor's direct superior. So when I tell you that by tomorrow morning your husband will be begging for mercy, I want you to understand that I'm not making an empty threat. I'm stating a simple fact." I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I lay in the most comfortable bed I'd ever experienced, in Estelle Montgomery's guest suite, wrapped in silk sheets that probably cost more than a month of groceries, and stared at the ceiling. My body had finally warmed up, but inside I felt frozen solid. Everything I thought I knew about my life had shattered in the space of a few hours. My husband had thrown me out to die. A woman I barely knew had saved me, and apparently she had the power to destroy Victor's career with a single phone call. But why would she? What did she care about the domestic problems of her employee? In the morning, a staff member I hadn't even heard enter brought me coffee and a set of clothes. Expensive cashmere, tailored wool pants, soft leather shoes. Everything fit perfectly. "Mrs. Montgomery asked you to join her in her study when you're ready," the woman said politely before disappearing. I dressed slowly, looking at myself in the floor-length mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different. The expensive clothes gave me an armor I hadn't realized I needed. I didn't look like a victim anymore. Estelle's study was a room that commanded respect. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a desk that looked like it had witnessed decades of important decisions. Estelle sat behind it, perfectly composed in a navy suit. "Sit down, Amara," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat, straightening my spine. "My nephew Marcus will be here in 10 minutes, Estelle announced. "And shortly after him, your husband. I want you present for this conversation." My heart started racing. "Mrs. Montgomery, I don't know if I can face him." "You can," she said firmly. "And you will. Your role is simple. You sit there and say nothing. You're a living reminder of what he did. Sometimes that's more powerful than any words." Right on schedule, there was a knock at the door. A man in his early 40s entered. He had the same sharp eyes as his aunt, the same air of authority. Marcus Montgomery looked every inch the successful CEO, but right now he looked nervous. "Aunt Estelle," he said, his voice tight. "You asked to see me?" "Yes." "Sit down, Marcus." He sat in the chair next to mine, glancing at me briefly with confusion before looking away. "Do you know who this woman is?" Estelle asked him. "No, Aunt Estelle. This is Amara Chen, wife of your director of logistics, Victor Reyes." I saw Marcus's face change, understanding, then discomfort, flashed across his features. He shifted in his seat. "I see," he said quietly. "Do you?" Estelle's voice was ice. "Because in a few minutes, Reyes himself will walk through that door. And before he does, I want you to understand something very clearly. Last night, that man threw his wife out into a blizzard wearing nothing but a nightgown. He locked her out of her own home and left her to freeze to death." Marcus turned even paler. He looked at me with something like horror in his eyes. "Aunt Estelle, I had no idea. That's terrible. But perhaps this is a private family matter?" If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Family matter? Estelle's eyebrows rose. "Marcus, when one of our executives demonstrates such a complete lack of moral character, such cruelty and disregard for human life, it becomes company business. What kind of man does this to his wife? And what does it say about our company that we employ him in a position of trust and authority?" "You're right, of course," Marcus said quickly. "I'll speak to him. We can handle this quietly, perhaps a reprimand, mandatory counseling." "You'll do more than that," Estelle cut him off. "You'll terminate his employment, effective immediately." Marcus's mouth opened and closed. "Aunt Estelle, with all respect, Victor Reyes has been with us for 10 years. He's one of our top performers. His division has exceeded targets every quarter. I can't just fire him over a domestic dispute without proper procedure." "You can't?" Estelle's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Or you won't." The knock on the door saved Marcus from having to answer. The secretary announced Victor's arrival. "Send him in," Estelle commanded. Victor walked into the study looking confident, almost cocky. He was dressed in one of his best suits, freshly shaved, clearly expecting this to be a minor inconvenience. Maybe he thought Estelle had heard some neighborhood gossip and he could charm his way through it. "Mrs. Montgomery, Marcus, good morning," he said smoothly. Then his eyes landed on me. The confidence drained from his face like water from a broken glass. He stared at me sitting there in expensive clothes, in the owner's personal study, and I watched him try to process what this meant. What is she doing here?" His voice came out rough. "She is my guest," Estelle replied coldly. "But the real question is, what are you doing here, Mr. Reyes?" Victor looked from me to Estelle to Marcus, clearly trying to figure out how to play this. There seems to be some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Estelle said, standing up slowly, "is yours. You seem to have misunderstood what kind of company this is and what kind of behavior we tolerate from our executives. Mrs. Montgomery, I don't know what she told you, but what she told me is irrelevant. What I witnessed myself is all that matters. I saw you throw your wife out into sub-freezing temperatures and lock the door. I watched it happen from my window." Victor's face went white. He hadn't known she was there, hadn't known anyone was watching. "As of this moment," Estelle continued, "you are terminated from Montgomery Global Industries. For conduct unbecoming, for moral turpitude, and for behavior that brings discredit to this organization. Your access will be revoked within the hour. HR will have your severance paperwork ready by end of day." I watched Victor's world collapse. This job, this position, the salary, the prestige, it was everything to him. He staggered slightly, grabbing the back of a chair. "You can't. Marcus, tell her. You can't do this over a personal argument. 10 years I've given this company." But Marcus was looking at the floor, saying nothing. Then something strange happened. The panic on Victor's face began to fade. It was replaced by something else. Calculation. A cold smile started to form on his lips. He straightened up. The fear vanished, replaced by an unsettling confidence. "Fired?" he asked, and his voice had changed completely. "Are you absolutely sure about that, Marcus?" Marcus looked up, startled by the tone. "I mean," Victor continued, looking directly at the CEO now, "you're sure you want to do this before we close the Sterling Concrete deal? 'Cause I'm pretty sure you don't want that." At those words, Marcus flinched visibly. The color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been punched. Estelle frowned, looking between the two men. "What Sterling Concrete deal? What does some vendor contract have to do with your termination?" But Victor wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at Marcus with a predator's gaze. And Marcus, the powerful CEO of a billion-dollar company, looked absolutely terrified. Victor's smile widened. He adjusted his cuffs casually. "Yeah, I didn't think you'd want to do this right now. So maybe we table this conversation until after Sterling wraps up? Give everyone time to cool down and think rationally?" He turned to leave, but as he passed my chair, he leaned down and whispered so only I could hear, "See you at home, sweetheart. Don't be late for dinner." Then he walked out, closing the door gently behind him. The silence in the study was deafening. Estelle's promise, so firm and powerful just moments ago, had crumbled to dust. Victor hadn't been destroyed. He hadn't begged for mercy. He'd walked out as a winner, leaving behind fear and confusion and an unspoken threat that hung in the air like poison. A masked otter. I sat frozen, watching the door close behind my husband. The trap Estelle had set had somehow sprung on itself. Peace over, inside, in the office now. Her face was a mask of ice. "Marcus, my office, now." Marcus stood up like a man walking to his own execution. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Point P. "What is the Sterling Concrete deal?" Estelle's voice could have cut glass. "Unconcrete. It's complicated. It's a strategic partnership that Victor has been managing. It's delicate, and if we remove him right now, the whole thing could fall apart. We could lose millions." Point P. "Millions?" Estelle's eyes narrowed. "Marcus, this company generates billions in revenue annually. You're telling me our entire operation depends on one logistics director and one vendor contract? Not the entire operation, but this particular deal? It's sensitive. Victor has relationships with their key people. If we fire him now, especially publicly, they might back out. We're already deep into negotiations." It was obvious to anyone with half a brain that Marcus was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. His hands were shaking. His voice was unsteady. This wasn't the concern of a CEO worried about a business deal. This was fear. I had been a financial analyst for 7 years before Victor convinced me to give it up. I knew what corporate fear looked like, and this was personal terror. "Leave us," Estelle said to her nephew, her voice flat with disappointment. "Get out of my sight." Marcus practically fled from the room. Estelle and I sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, she looked at me. "You used to work in finance, didn't you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Financial analysis and auditing. 7 years at Morrison and Associates before I quit." "Before your husband convinced you to quit," Estelle corrected. She studied me thoughtfully. "Tell me, Amara, in your professional opinion, did that look like a simple business dispute?" "No," I answered honestly. "That looked like blackmail." Estelle nodded slowly. "My nephew is hiding something, and your husband is using it to hold him hostage." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. "Starting tomorrow, you're going to work for me." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm creating a position. My personal financial consultant. You'll report directly to me, no one else. I'll give you complete access to every file, every account, every database in the company. Your job is simple. Find the dirt. Find out what Victor is holding over Marcus's head and destroy it." My heart started pounding. This wasn't just a job offer. This was a mission. A chance for revenge, yes, but also a chance to use the skills I'd buried for so long. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're motivated," Estelle said simply. "Because you're smart. And because you have every reason to want to bring him down." She turned to face me. "Do you want this job, Amara?" I thought about Victor's whispered threat, thought about his hands on my arms, throwing me into the snow, thought about 8 years of slowly losing myself. "Yes," I said, "I want it." The next morning, Estelle's driver took me to the Montgomery Global Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and glass in downtown Boston. I had a security pass, admin access codes, and an office with a view. I also had the attention of every employee in the building. Word had spread fast. Victor hadn't wasted any time. By the time I walked into that office, everyone knew some version of the story. The crazy wife who got kicked out. The hysterical woman who probably deserved it? Poor Victor, driven to extremes by her paranoia. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked through the open floor plan to the elevators, hear the whispers, see the smirks, but I kept my head high and my eyes forward. My new office was small, but private, with glass walls right next to the executive suite. Marcus avoided me all day, hurrying past with his phone pressed to his ear, pretending not to see me. The IT director came by around noon, a nervous young man who handed me an envelope with my login credentials. "Mrs. Montgomery's orders," he said. "You have full administrative access, everything in the company database. If you need anything else, just ask." He practically ran out of my office. I opened the envelope, logged in, and stared at my screen. Somewhere in this digital maze was the answer. The lever Victor was using to control Marcus. The secret that had let a mid-level logistics director walk out of a firing with a smile on his face. I started with the sterling concrete deal. Hours passed as I combed through files. Contracts, invoices, shipping manifests, correspondence. At first glance, everything looked normal. Standard construction material supply agreement. But my trained eye started catching irregularities. The prices were wrong. Cement was marked up 40% above market rate. Rebar prices were inflated. And the shipping costs, they were being handled by some company I'd never heard of. Something called Apex Transit Solutions. I looked up Apex Transit. It had been registered 3 months ago. The business address was a mailbox rental store. Classic shell company. I followed the money. Payments went to Apex's account and within hours were broken down and dispersed to other accounts. I spent the entire day tracking those threads, and by evening I had my first major discovery. All those payments, all those little streams of money, eventually flowed to the same place. One account at a small private bank. The same 20-digit account number kept appearing. But whose account was it? I couldn't get that information from the bank directly, but I could search for it in the company's internal systems. Every document, every file, every database entry going back years. I launched the search and waited. It took almost an hour to crawl through everything. When the results appeared, there was only one match. An HR form from 3 years ago. An employee had requested direct deposit to that specific account for supplementary retirement savings. I opened the file. A photograph looked back at me. A beautiful woman in her early 30s with confident eyes and a bright smile. Simone Rivers, regional sales manager. My hands started shaking as I pulled up everything about Simone Rivers. Her business travel records, her expense reports, her email correspondence. And slowly, piece by piece, a picture emerged. Simone's business trips matched Victor's. Same cities, same dates. Those hotel charges I'd found on our credit card statements, Simone had expense reports from the same hotels on the same nights. She wasn't just his accomplice in the theft. She was his mistress, the woman whose perfume I'd smelled on his coat. The woman he'd been choosing over me for God knows how long. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but instead, I kept working. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I tracked Simone's movements over the past week. She'd taken personal time off. Not in the office. I found her home address in the HR system and made a decision. I couldn't sit behind this desk anymore. I needed to see this with my own eyes. I took a cab to her address, an upscale apartment building in the financial district. I had the driver park across the street and wait. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, just following an instinct. An hour passed, then another. I was starting to think this was a waste of time when the building's entrance opened and Simone walked out. She was wearing a loose coat, but even from a distance, I could see it. The slight swell of her stomach, the careful way she moved, the protective hand she kept resting on her belly. She was pregnant. My world tilted. I watched her walk to a small park nearby and sit on a bench, checking her phone. She looked peaceful, happy. 10 minutes later, a car pulled up. My car. The SUV Victor called our family car. Victor got out. He didn't see my taxi parked down the street. He only had eyes for Simone. I watched him walk to her. Watched him embrace her carefully, tenderly. Watched him place his hand on her stomach with such gentle care. She showed him something. Photographs. Even from a distance, I could tell what they were. Ultrasound pictures. Victor's face broke into a smile I'd never seen before. Pure joy, wonder, love. He wasn't just stealing money. He was building a whole new life, a new family, with her and his child. I was just garbage to be disposed of. Old, unwanted, in the way. That's why he'd thrown me out into the snow. He wasn't angry. He was clearing space for his real family. The driver coughed politely. "Where to now, miss?" I stared at the spot where Victor's car had been, my mind racing. The pain of watching him with her was transforming into something else, something cold and sharp and useful. "Back to the office," I heard myself say. Quickly. I had work to do. Back at my desk, I attacked the problem with renewed energy. Now that I knew Simone was involved, everything became clearer. I found dozens of fake consulting contracts between Montgomery Global and SR Consulting Services, Simone's sole proprietorship. The company was paying her hundreds of thousands of dollars for phantom consulting work, market analysis that never happened, reports that were never delivered, all approved and signed off by Victor. It was crude, obvious theft. But it worked because Marcus's fear protected it. No one would question a deal that had the CEO's implicit blessing. But this still wasn't enough. These were the symptoms, not the disease. What was Victor holding over Marcus? I switched tactics. If the leverage wasn't in the official financial documents, it had to be somewhere else. I started searching the company's servers for anything unusual. Personal files, hidden folders, archived emails. It was nearly 3 in the morning when I found it. Deep in the system backups, in a folder labeled simply MISC 2023, there was a video file. The file name was just a string of numbers that looked like a date and timestamp from the previous year. I put on headphones and clicked play. The footage was grainy, black and white, from a security camera. It showed a private booth in an upscale restaurant. Marcus sat at the table, looking nervous, checking his watch repeatedly. Another man entered the frame. Someone I didn't recognize. Well-dressed, confident. They exchanged brief words I couldn't hear. Then the stranger opened a briefcase and removed something wrapped in dark cloth. He placed it on the table, spoke to Marcus, gesturing at the bundle. Marcus hesitated, looking around nervously. Finally, he nodded. He took the bundle and quickly put it in his own briefcase. The men shook hands. The stranger left. I paused the video and zoomed in on the stranger's face, ran it through a reverse image search. It took less than a minute to identify him. Richard Thornton, Chief Operating Officer of Blackwell Construction, Montgomery Global's biggest competitor. I looked at the timestamp on the video. 13 months ago, 2 days before Montgomery Global mysteriously lost the bid on a massive municipal development project. A bid that Blackwell Construction won. It was a bribe. Marcus had sold out his own company. And somehow, Victor had gotten his hands on the evidence. That's why Marcus was terrified. That's why he couldn't fire Victor, couldn't challenge him, couldn't do anything but let him steal with impunity. Victor was blackmailing the CEO with proof of corporate betrayal. I sat back in my chair, my heart racing. This was so much bigger than I'd thought. Victor wasn't just a cruel husband and a thief. He was a blackmailer operating at the highest level. And Marcus wasn't just weak, he was corrupt. I copied the video to a secure drive and deleted my access logs. Then I just sat there in the darkness, thinking, if I showed this to Estelle, I'd destroy Marcus, her own nephew. It would create a massive scandal that could damage the entire company. Hundreds of innocent people could lose their jobs. But if I didn't show her, Victor would continue operating with total immunity. He'd keep stealing, keep building his new life on stolen money, keep tormenting anyone who got in his way. There was no good choice, only necessary ones. I gathered everything. The financial records, the shell company documentation, the evidence of Simone's pregnancy, and most importantly, that video. And I went to find Estelle. It was barely dawn when I arrived at her mansion. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up and rang the bell until staff answered. Estelle was already awake, sitting in her study with morning coffee, as if she'd been expecting me. "You found something," she said. It wasn't a question. I handed her the secure drive, everything, the whole operation. How he's stealing, who's helping him, where the money goes, and why Marcus can't stop him. She plugged the drive into her laptop. I walked her through it all, starting with the financial fraud, then Simone's involvement, the shell companies, the competing business they were building. Estelle's face remained composed, but I could see the fury building in her eyes. Then I showed her the video. She watched Marcus take that bribe in silence. When it finished, she sat perfectly still for a long moment. "My own nephew," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My sister's son. I gave him everything, built this company to give to him. And he sold it out for what? A briefcase full of cash? Mrs. Montgomery, I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," she cut me off. Her eyes were hard as diamonds now. "You did exactly what I asked you to do. You found the truth. Now I need to decide what to do with it." She stood and walked to the window, the same window she'd been standing at when she'd offered me this job. "The Founders Gala," she said suddenly. "It's in 3 days. Every major player in the industry will be there. Board members, division heads, our top performers. The press." She turned to look at me. "You're going to prepare a presentation, Amara. Everything you found. We're not going to the police. Not yet. First, we're going to destroy him in front of everyone who matters. Every person whose respect he values, whose opinion matters to him. We'll let the whole industry see exactly who Victor Reyes really is. And when we're done with him, there won't be a company in this city that would touch him." For the next 2 days, I lived in Estelle's mansion, working on the presentation. I selected the most damning evidence and arranged it in a narrative that was impossible to refute. First slide. The video of Marcus taking the bribe, explaining why Victor had gotten away with everything. Then the financial fraud, the shell companies, the evidence of Simone's pregnancy and their plan to start a competing company. Finally, proof that Victor had sabotaged Montgomery Global's own bids to help that competitor succeed. Each slide was a nail in his coffin. The evening before the gala, Marcus came to see me. He must have heard about his aunt's plan because he looked like death itself. "Amara, please," he begged, standing in the doorway of my temporary office. "Don't do this. We can handle this privately. I'll fire Victor. I'll file a police report. But please, not a public scandal. It'll destroy the company's reputation." You should have thought about the company's reputation before you took that bribe, I said coldly, not looking up from my work. I know I'm guilty. I made a terrible mistake, but this will hurt hundreds of innocent employees. Think about them. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about how they deserve better than a corrupt CEO and a thieving executive bleeding the company dry. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. I worked late into the night, perfecting every detail. Around 2 a.m, I finally decided it was ready. Tomorrow, at the Gala, in front of Boston's entire business elite, I would press that button and end Victor's world. I saved the file, backed it up to 3 different locations, and closed my laptop. When I checked my phone, there was a new message from Victor. Nice try, babe. Marcus just gave me everything. You should have stayed in the snow. My blood turned to ice. I opened my laptop. Went to the folder where I'd saved the presentation. Empty. I checked my backup locations, my cloud storage, my work server. All empty, completely wiped. My hands started shaking. I tried to access my email drafts, my temporary files, my document recovery. Nothing. Everything was gone. Marcus. He hadn't come to beg me to stop. He'd come to buy time while IT remotely accessed my devices and erased everything. He'd made a deal with the devil to save himself, given Victor everything, my files, my access codes, my evidence, all of it. I sat there staring at the empty screen, and for the first time since this all began, I felt truly defeated. Tomorrow was the Gala. Victor would walk in knowing I had nothing. No evidence, no weapon, no way to hurt him. He had won. I sat frozen, staring at that empty folder on my screen. Victor's message mocked me from my phone. The trap had been sprung, and I was the one caught in it. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. But then something shifted inside me, a small, quiet voice that refused to give up. I closed my laptop and walked downstairs. It was nearly 3 a.m, but I knew Estelle would still be awake. Women like her didn't need much sleep. They ran on pure will. The study door was ajar, light spilling out. I knocked softly. "Come in, Amara." She sat in her usual chair, a book in her lap, but I could tell she hadn't been reading. She'd been waiting. "It's gone," I said, my voice shaking. "Marcus gave him everything. All my files are erased. We have nothing for tomorrow." Estelle looked at me with those sharp eyes, and to my surprise, there was no anger in them. If anything, she looked almost amused. "Sit down," she said calmly. I sat, confused by her reaction. "Let me ask you something, Amara. Do you really think I would entrust something this important, the fate of my entire company, to a single laptop connected to a network my compromised nephew controls?" I blinked. "What? The day you started working for me, I gave orders to my personal security team. Not company security, my private team that reports only to me. They installed monitoring software that mirrored every single action you took on that computer in real time. Every file you opened, every document you created, every piece of evidence you found was instantly backed up to a secure server in a facility that Marcus doesn't even know exists. I felt my jaw drop. Everything is safe, Amara. Every document, every screenshot, the video of the bribe, all of it. But then, why? Why let Marcus think he succeeded? Estelle's smile turned predatory. "Because your husband is arrogant and self-assured, but he's not stupid. If he suspected we still had the evidence, if he felt truly threatened, what would he do?" I thought about it. He wouldn't come to the gala. He'd run, try to hide the money, destroy records, maybe even leave the country. Exactly. I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to believe he'd won, that he'd outsmarted us all. Marcus's weakness became our greatest weapon. She leaned forward. Do you understand what happened tonight? I nodded slowly. Marcus's betrayal wasn't actually a betrayal. You told him to do it. Last night, when he came begging, I told him Victor claimed to have a second copy of that bribe video. I said Victor threatened that even if we destroyed the first copy, he'd release the backup if we went forward with the exposure. That put Marcus in an impossible position. Damned if he helped us, damned if he didn't. So you gave him a way out, I said, understanding now. You told him to go to Victor, to pretend to switch sides. I ordered him to earn Victor's complete trust, to give him access to your laptop so he could delete everything himself, to make Victor believe the threat was completely neutralized. And to judge by that smug message he sent you, the plan worked perfectly. I stared at the 70-year-old woman who had orchestrated this entire psychological operation like a chess grandmaster, and I felt something like awe. The presentation is ready, she continued, picking up a folder from her desk. My team prepared it based on all your findings. Tomorrow evening, when Victor walks into that gala, confident and relaxed, celebrating his victory, you'll walk up to that podium and press the button, and his whole world will burn. The gala was held at the Pemberton, one of Boston's most prestigious hotels. The ballroom was magnificent, crystal chandeliers, a live orchestra, hundreds of guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. This was the event of the season, where deals were made and reputations were built or destroyed. I arrived with Estelle. I wore a gown she'd provided, a stunning deep emerald silk that made me feel like a warrior going into battle. As we entered, I could feel eyes turning toward us, whispers spreading. Victor was already there, holding court in the center of the room. He looked triumphant, laughing with colleagues, accepting their sympathy. Such a shame about the Sterling deal, Victor, but everyone knows you did your best. He played his part perfectly, the dedicated employee disappointed by circumstances beyond his control. Then he saw me. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. I watched confusion flash across his face, followed by contempt. He probably thought I'd come to watch from the sidelines, to see him celebrate his victory. He actually smirked at me before turning back to his conversation. Simone was there too, standing at the edge of his group. Her loose-fitting cocktail dress couldn't quite hide her condition anymore. She glowed with that particular radiance of early pregnancy, touching her stomach occasionally with unconscious pride. The sight of them together should have hurt. A week ago, it would have destroyed me. But now I felt nothing but cold purpose. The speeches began. Industry leaders talked about the year's achievements. Board members praised various divisions. And then Estelle took the stage. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, her voice carrying through the elegant room. "We gather every year to celebrate our successes. But tonight, I want to talk about something more important than profits or market share. I want to talk about integrity." A curious silence fell over the room. This year, our company faced a threat unlike any other. Not from competitors or market forces, but from within. We were being systematically betrayed, bled dry by those we trusted. But we were saved by the intelligence, courage, and dedication of one woman. She paused, and every eye in the room focused on her. "Amara Chen, please join me on stage." The whispers exploded. Hundreds of heads turned toward me. Victor's smile disappeared. I saw his face go pale as I made my way through the crowd. I climbed the stairs and stood beside Estelle at the podium. She handed me a small remote control. "Mrs. Chen will now show you what she discovered," Estelle said, then stepped aside. I pressed the button. The screens on either side of the stage came to life. The first image appeared, a blown-up invoice from one of Victor's fake contracts, his signature prominently displayed. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. I pressed the button again. The screen went dark. Then the video began. Marcus in that restaurant booth. The stranger approaching. The bundle of money changing hands. Gasps filled the ballroom. People turned to look at Marcus, who stood near the stage, white-faced but meeting their stares. He didn't look away. This was his penance, and he was accepting it. Next slide, the financial flow chart showing how Victor had created shell companies to funnel money out of Montgomery Global. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing to Simone's accounts. Then the photograph. Victor and Simone at the medical clinic, his hand on her pregnant belly, ultrasound pictures in her hand. A loving couple, planning their future. Women in the audience gasped. Someone pointed at Simone, who had turned ghostly white. Next, the incorporation documents for their competing company, Meridian Construction and Supply, with Victor and Simone's names as founders before they'd been replaced by a straw man. And finally, the coup de grace. The bid documents for the major municipal contract that Montgomery Global had mysteriously lost. Perfect documentation, meticulous planning, except for one critical missing page in the final submission. The deliberate sabotage that had handed a $100 million contract to our competitor. Victor Reyes didn't just steal money, I heard myself say into the microphone. My voice was steady, clear. He didn't just betray his wife. He systematically betrayed every person in this room, every employee who trusted him, every shareholder who believed in this company. He created competing firms using stolen resources. He poached our clients and our talent, and he deliberately sabotaged our own bids to ensure his puppet company would succeed. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked at Victor. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, surrounded by colleagues who were now staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to fury. He tried to move toward the exit, but two men in suits were already positioning themselves near the doors. Estelle's security team, I realized. She'd thought of everything. Two other men approached Simone, who had collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Ladies and gentlemen, Estelle stepped forward again. I want you to know that we have already contacted the authorities. Full cooperation will be given to any investigation. And I want you to see what happens when someone tries to destroy this company from within. She gestured to Marcus, who slowly climbed onto the stage. His face was ashen, but he took the microphone with shaking hands. What you saw in that first video was real, Marcus said, his voice breaking. 13 months ago, I accepted a bribe from our competitor. I betrayed this company, betrayed my family's legacy, betrayed all of you. It was the worst mistake of my life, and I've paid for it every day since. He paused, struggling to continue. Victor Reyes discovered what I'd done. He's been blackmailing me ever since, using my crime to shield his own. I was too weak and too ashamed to stop him. And in my weakness, I enabled him to steal millions. I am responsible for that failure. Marcus looked directly at his aunt. Effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Montgomery Global Industries. I will cooperate fully with any investigation into my conduct, and I will accept whatever consequences come. He set down the microphone and walked off the stage. The room erupted in chaos. Shocked conversations, people on their phones, reporters who'd been invited scrambling for details. I watched Victor being escorted out by security, his hands already being secured behind his back by police officers who'd apparently been waiting outside. He looked back at me once, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not contempt. Just absolute, hollow defeat. Simone was led out separately, her career and her carefully planned future crumbling around her. Estelle took the microphone one last time. I know this is shocking. I know many of you are wondering what happens now to Montgomery Global. So let me be clear. Her voice rang with authority. This company will survive. We will recover every stolen dollar. We will rebuild stronger than ever. And we will do it with leadership that has proven their integrity under fire. She turned to look at me. Starting tomorrow, Amara Chen will serve as our interim CEO while we conduct a full internal audit and restructuring. She has my complete confidence and the full support of our board of directors. The room exploded again. I stood there, stunned. CEO. Me. The woman who'd been thrown into the snow to die less than 2 weeks ago. Estelle leaned close and whispered, "You earned this. Now show them what you can do." I took the microphone with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. Thank you all for your patience tonight. I know this is difficult to process." I looked out at the sea of faces. "I promise you this. Starting tomorrow, we begin the work of rebuilding trust. We'll implement new oversight systems, new accountability measures. We'll create a culture where fraud like this can never happen again. And we will emerge from this stronger and better than before." I paused, then added, "The party is over, but tomorrow, the real work begins. For those of you committed to this company's integrity and future, I look forward to working with you." I set down the microphone and walked off the stage. The room was still buzzing with shocked conversations as I made my way to the exit. Outside in the cold night air, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Really breathe. For the first time in 8 years. Estelle joined me a moment later. "Well done. I couldn't have done any of it without you," I said. "Perhaps, but I gave you tools and opportunity. What you did with them was entirely your choice." She looked at me thoughtfully. "You're going to be good at this, you know. Better than Marcus ever was." "I don't know if I'm ready." "Nobody's ever ready. You learn as you go. But you're smart, you're honest, and you're motivated. That's more than enough to start with." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "What happens to Marcus?" I asked. "That's up to the prosecutors now. But he'll face consequences. As he should." Estelle's expression softened slightly. "He's weak, but he's not evil. Perhaps this will finally teach him to be strong." 3 months later, I sat in what used to be Marcus's office, now mine, reviewing the quarterly reports. The restructuring was going better than expected. We'd recovered most of the stolen funds from accounts Victor and Simone had been foolish enough to keep in trackable locations. Victor was awaiting trial on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Simone had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony. The baby, my husband's baby with another woman, would be born before the trial concluded. That hurt in ways I still couldn't fully process, but it was no longer my problem. Marcus had pled guilty to accepting bribes and was serving 18 months in minimum security. Estelle visited him weekly. Family was family, even when they disappointed you. My divorce had been finalized last week. Victor had tried to fight it, tried to claim he deserved alimony since I was now a highly paid CEO. The judge had laughed him out of court. I was free. Truly free. For the first time since I'd met Victor, I belonged entirely to myself. There was a knock on my door. My assistant poked her head in. "Mrs. Montgomery is here to see you," she said. "Send her in, please." Estelle entered, elegant as always in a tailored navy suit. She settled into the chair across from my desk with a satisfied smile. "The board meeting went well," she said. "They've voted to make your position permanent. You're officially the CEO of Montgomery Global Industries." I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Not just pride or satisfaction, but something deeper. Validation. Proof that I was more than what Victor had tried to make me believe I was. "Thank you," I managed to say, "for everything, for saving my life that night, for giving me this chance." "I didn't give you anything you hadn't already earned," Estelle replied. "That night when I saw you standing in the snow, about to smash your way back into your own house, I saw someone who refused to be a victim, someone who would fight. I simply provided the battlefield." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You know, my late husband used to say that the best revenge is massive success. You've certainly proven that true." After she left, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the Boston skyline. My city, my company, my life. I thought about the woman I'd been just 3 months ago, sitting in that kitchen, powerless and small, watching her husband lie to her face. So afraid to challenge him, so convinced she needed him to survive. That woman was gone. She'd frozen to death on a snow-covered porch, and someone new had been born in her place. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. For a second, my heart clenched, thinking it might be Victor finding some way to contact me. But it wasn't. "MPAC, we heard about your appointment as CEO. Several of our senior analysts who worked with you years ago wanted to reach out. We're so proud of you. You always were brilliant, and now everyone can see it. Congratulations." I smiled. My old colleagues, the career I thought was dead and buried, the professional reputation I thought I'd lost forever. Turned out I hadn't lost it. I just misplaced it for a while. "MPAC, it didn't lost forever." I typed back, "Thank you, Rebecca. That means more than you know." As the sun set over Boston, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I made a decision. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. I started typing. Not a business memo or financial report. A story. My story. Because there were other women out there right now, sitting in kitchens like I had been, trapped in situations that felt hopeless. Women who'd given up careers for men who didn't deserve them. Women who felt small and powerless and stuck. They needed to know what I'd learned. That you're never as powerless as you think. That the skills and strength inside you don't disappear just because someone tries to convince you they do. That sometimes the worst moment of your life is actually the beginning of your best one. They needed to know that when someone throws you into the snow and locks the door, when you're standing there with nothing but the clothes on your back and a stone in your hand, ready to fight your way back in, that's not the end of your story. That's just the moment you realize how strong you've always been. I wrote for hours, the words pouring out of me. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I documented everything, not just the facts, but the feelings. The terror and humiliation, yes, but also the rage that became purpose, the despair that transformed into determination. When I finally stopped, it was past midnight. My office was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen. I read through what I'd written and I knew it was good. True and raw and real. Tomorrow, I'd be CEO again. I'd have meetings and decisions and responsibilities. But tonight, I was just Amara, telling her story, making sense of the journey that had brought her from that frozen porch to this corner office. I saved the document and titled it simply, "From the Snow." Then I looked out at the city lights one more time and whispered to my reflection in the dark window, "You survived. And you're going to make sure other women know they can too." If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Because that's what this was really about, not revenge, not even justice. It was about transformation, about refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your worth or determine your future. Victor had tried to erase me. He'd throw me away like garbage, thinking I was too weak, too dependent, too broken to fight back. He was wrong. And now, sitting in this office at the top of a billion-dollar company, I had proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof that the woman he'd discarded was worth more than he'd ever know. The next morning, I walked into a leadership meeting with 15 department heads, all waiting to hear from their new CEO. Some faces were friendly, some skeptical, some openly curious about whether I could really handle this role. I stood at the head of that table and thought about everything I'd been through. The cold, the fear, the humiliation, the slow, methodical work of building my case, the moment of pressing that button and watching justice unfold. Good morning, everyone, I said, my voice clear and confident. Let's talk about where we're going from here. And as I led that meeting, I realized something profound. Victor hadn't just failed to destroy me. He'd accidentally created his own worst nightmare. Because the woman he'd underestimated, the wife he'd thrown away, the person he'd thought was weak and dependent, she was now in charge of everything he'd tried to steal. And she was just getting started. The months that followed were challenging but exhilarating. I implemented new financial oversight systems to prevent fraud. I rebuilt relationships with clients Victor had damaged. I promoted talented people who'd been overlooked under the old regime. And I made sure that every woman in our company knew that if they ever faced harassment, discrimination, or abuse, they had a CEO who would listen, who would believe them, who would act. Because I'd been there. I knew what it felt like to be powerless. And I was determined that no one in my organization would ever feel that way again. 6 months into my tenure as CEO, I got a letter. It was from a women's shelter in downtown Boston, asking if I'd be willing to speak to their residents about my experience. I said yes. Standing in front of those women, some with bruises still healing, some with children clinging to them, all with that same look of fear and uncertainty I remembered so well. I told them my story. I told them about the night in the snow, about feeling worthless and alone, about thinking I had nothing and no way forward. And then I told them about finding the strength to fight back, about discovering skills I'd forgotten I had, about allies appearing in unexpected places. I'm not gonna lie to you, I said. It's hard. It's terrifying. Some days you'll want to give up. But you're stronger than you know. You have more value than anyone who hurt you will ever understand. And your story doesn't end with what they did to you. That's just a chapter, a painful one, but not the whole book. When I finished speaking, a young woman in the back row raised her hand. How did you stop being afraid? I thought about that question carefully. I didn't, I admitted. I'm still afraid sometimes, but I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite it. Every time you choose to take one more step, you're being brave. Every time you refuse to believe the lies they told you about yourself, you're being strong. And eventually, those small acts of courage add up to a completely new life. The applause when I finished was modest but genuine. As I left, several women came up to thank me, to tell me their own stories, to ask for advice. I gave them my card. If you need a job, if you need a reference, if you just need someone to talk to who understands, call me. I mean it. And I did mean it, because while I couldn't save everyone, I could help some. And every woman I helped was a small victory against all the victors of the world. A year after that terrible night in the snow, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, a beautiful space I'd chosen and paid for myself, and looked out at the city. Victor was in prison. Simone had given birth to his daughter and was trying to rebuild her life with her family in another state. Marcus had served his time and was working in a nonprofit, apparently trying to make amends. And me? I was thriving. The company was stronger than ever. I'd started a foundation to help women rebuild their careers after leaving abusive relationships. I'd written my story and shared it, receiving hundreds of messages from women who saw themselves in it. But more than any of that, I found myself again. Not the woman I was before Victor. Someone new. Someone forged in ice and fire, tested and proven. My phone rang. Estelle. Dinner tonight? She asked. I want to discuss expanding into the European market. Absolutely. 7 o'clock? Perfect. And Amara, bring your ideas. I have a feeling they're going to be brilliant. After we hung up, I smiled. Estelle had become more than a mentor. She was family, the mother figure I'd needed when my own mother had believed Victor's lies. Speaking of which, my parents had eventually reached out, apologizing profusely once they understood what had really happened. We were rebuilding our relationship slowly. Some damage takes time to heal. But I had time now. I had my whole life ahead of me. As the sun set over Boston, I raised a glass of wine in a silent toast. To survival, to strength, to second chances, and to every woman who's ever been thrown into the snow and found the fire inside to melt it all away. My name is Amara Chen, and this was my story. But it's not just my story anymore. It belongs to every woman who's been told she's nothing and proved she's everything. To every person who's been knocked down and chosen to stand back up. Your story isn't over. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom, freezing on a doorstep, losing everything you thought defined you to discover who you really are. And who you really are, that person is stronger than anyone ever gave you credit for. Trust me, I know, because I'm living proof. Thank you for being here with me through this entire journey. If my story touched you, if it gave you hope or strength, or just reminded you of your own power, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Tell me what city you're from. I want to see how far a woman's impactful voice can truly reach. Together, we can build a community where truthful stories like this one inspire change, where we support each other, and where no woman ever has to face her battles alone. Your voice matters, your story matters, and I'm here to make sure the world knows it.